Everybody has a story, but not all stories are being told. This is Benson the Storyteller, and these are some of our untold stories. Good morning, beautiful people. Welcome to my YouTube channel. For those of you who are new, my name is Benson the Storyteller on YouTube. Please subscribe and join the family. For those of you who are regular viewers, welcome back and thank you for your support. This is a series of videos called My Stories. This is actually the second video. The first previous video was about how I moved from Kenya to the UK and what inspired me to do that. But on this video, I want to start from the very beginning. You know, when you're giving people stories, it's always nice to start from the very beginning and move progressively. You know, how I got here, I have to start with how it all started. So, it all started in a village called Kawakungu. That's in Western Kenya. That's Kisumu, a place in Nyakach. When I was born, my mother was doing her training, her teaching training. And my father at the same time also was doing his accounts. And I couldn't be with my mother because she was in college, teaching training college. So my mother had me go and stay with my grandmother. So most of my early years, I lived with my grandma. Now, by that time, my grandma, all her kids, which is my dad and my uncles, were all grown up. So she was basically lonely. She had no one else to stay with at home. It was just her and my granddad in the house. So when my mom brought this bundle of joy, she was happy and she didn't mind and she liked it because at least there'd be someone else in the house, you know, to keep her company. So I used to be given stories by my mom, my grandma. She used to tell me that I was very, very close to her. And I even wanted to suckle, you know, because by the time my mom handed me over to my grandma, I was still very young and I was still at the age where I was suckling, you know. And my grandma said that I used to always want to, you know, to suckle on her breasts. And until the point where she said, okay, fine, you know, despite the fact that there was no milk, she'd let me suckle, and after I'd finished, she'd get me porridge and get me milk, you know, and I'd just be fine and go to sleep. So I had this bond with my grandmother. And actually for a while I looked at her like my real biological mother. Now at this time I used to stay at home. My mom and dad occasionally would come visit, but most of the time when I was growing up I stayed with my grandma. So after a while, my parents wanted me to move closer to Kisumu town because I had gotten to the age now where I was supposed to start, you know, going to kindergarten and stuff. So I remember my parents came in a taxi, and they started packing stuff. So I'm seeing things are being packed and put in the taxi. And I was wondering, because I'm just seeing my grandma is just seated there and unbothered. You know, she's just doing her own things. And I'm like, Grandma, aren't we packing? Why are you why are you still just seated there and you're not packing? You know, I'm busy with dragging, you know, I'm so excited. Because I'm being told we are going to town. You know, I've always had that town, there are cars, you know, there are all sort of stuff in town, you know, tall buildings. So I was like, oh, I have to go and see these things. So I'm busy, I'm helping them pack, but I didn't know that I was going alone and my grandma was remaining. So I remember everything was packed And then my mom carried me, put me in the car. And when I'm looking, I'm seeing my grandma is just at the door. So I'm like, Dani, ine magari riti. That's Luo. I'm a Luo. And that means, grandma, you're the one who the car's waiting for, And I remember seeing my parents get in the car and the driver and the car start driving off, And I started screaming. I'm telling you, I was crying. I was trying to get out the window, because I'd always looked at my grandma like she was my paternal, like my real mother, because most of my early years I was staying with my grandma, because my mother was doing her teaching and my dad was doing his accounting courses. So that's how I left my grandma, and I had no idea that I was not going to reunite with my grandma for over 5 or 6 years from that particular time. It was like the last time I was going to see my grandma for a very long time. So I go to Kisumu, and I moved from staying with my grandma now to staying with my auntie. So there's an auntie of mine who's the elder sister to my mother. She stays in Kondele. Just one of the outskirts from Kisumu town. And I started staying with her because still I wasn't staying with my mom. My mom still was doing her teaching. I think she started to be posted or something, and she couldn't stay with me yet. So I remember I used to stay with my auntie, a very lovely lady. She died some years ago, but she was a very wonderful woman. I love her so much. She took me in as her own. She had all her kids were older than me, and most of them, I think they were in school by that time I'm not sure where they were in school at, whether it was Nairobi or Kisumu, but I just remember I used to stay with my grandma, and I used to go to a baby school some distance from the house. It was actually just a straight road, and then somewhere on your left there's a school there. So the things I remember very well about this time is that every time I used to come back from school, opposite on the other side they had a piece of land that they were building some nice story buildings, and there used to be this machine. It was called a compressor. Later I hear it's called a compressor. It's this one for breaking stones. It vibrates, ta, 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 and it had this big body, that used to roar, and I was terrified of that sound. I'm telling you, I used to be terrified. Anytime I'd come back and see that thing, that machine there, when they were breaking the stone, it made so much noise. I used to just cry on the road. Like, I don't know what I thought that machine was, but it was so noisy and I was scared. Most of the time, strangers would find me crying. They ask me what's going on. I just point, I want to go here about that machine, and they'd escort me. Sometimes my auntie had to come. Oh, I was a child. Thinking back about it, it was just crazy. So in that school, another thing I remember is that we had these tins. These days I don't see kids having these tins. They were round, kind of like round and like ovalish. So you open the top, and then inside it there were layers, so you could put some food and then put a different type of food on the other layer, and then the top. All right. So every morning my auntie used to give me food. Maybe it's beans, and then maybe rice, or maybe bread, beans, and then she tightens it and gives me. So I used to carry it to school. It's like, let me guess, maybe the school was like 300 meters away. Yeah. So every day she used to pack my food, and I go with it. So when I go with my food, she used to notice that every evening when I come back, I haven't eaten my food. But when she opens it for me, I eat like I was really hungry. And she used to ask me, Benson, what's the problem? Why don't you eat? And I never used to. You know, when I was young, I was very, very quiet. You know, I was such an introvert. And it's only later that that would change. But that's a story of another day. I'll give you that story later on. But as for now, just know that I was a very quiet and shy kid. I'd have a problem, I'd go through something, but I wouldn't say. You know, I'd expect you to, you know, maybe find out what the problem is by yourself and sort me out, but I would never complain. I'd never say anything. So every time she used to see me coming back with the food, to the extent that she even wanted to punish me, you know, and she wanted me to say why I'm not eating this food. Is it that the food is bad? Is it that it had too much salt? You know, I remember I always used to come back and I'm like, now what am I going to tell my auntie, you know? So what happened was this. One day, the same thing that my auntie noticed, my teacher noticed the same thing. Because I used to come and then, you know, there's the break time when you go eat. So kids would go open their lunch boxes and start eating. But then when she'd look in the class, she'd find me just seated there with my lunch box. I haven't touched, I'm not eating, I'm just seated there. And then people would come back, students would come back, kids would come back, and then every day she'd notice. So, you know, some teachers are very nice and keen, you know, and caring. So one day, she just called me, you know. He told me, Benson, come. Sit next to me over here. So I sat. Then she asked me, have you eaten your food? I said, no. Then she said, I want you to eat next to me here. So I took my lunch box. I struggled to open it. I couldn't. I put it down. So she was like, okay, I see. So, no, before that, she'd been watching me, actually. She'd been watching me and seeing that I've been trying to open it, but I couldn't. And I put it down and I just sit there. So she saw it the second time. That's when she called me. She told me, she asked, have you eaten? I said, no. I want you to eat. So I tried opening my lunchbox. I couldn't. So she realized, oh, this boy, poor boy, this boy hasn't been eating because the lid has been too tight. So she was asking me, is this why you haven't been eating? Then I just nodded, yeah. And why didn't you say? I was just quiet. You know, I was shy to the extent that, I mean, it was bad. Yeah, I'd rather go hungry without, you know, going and saying. So every evening, every lunchtime, she used to call me, you know, and tell me to sit next to her and open for me my lunchbox. And with time, you know, I got so used to her and I used to just come directly and hand it to her and say, please open it for me. So it wasn't, from that point, every time I used to go home, my auntie was like, oh, I see, these days you're eating. You know, these days I think you've started liking my cooking, you know. But she actually never got to know that. It's just because she used to, because you know those things, it has a part where you can even put tea. So it has to be closed very tightly so that whatever liquid you put inside doesn't pour. But she just didn't know that generally for a young child like at my age I couldn't open it, you know. And she never got to know about that because the teacher, I loved her. That lady, that woman was a very nice teacher. She was very friendly, and it was just unfortunate that I never got to meet her again, because later on I went looking for her, but I never found her. It's just sad. I would have wanted to go meet her and say thank you, and I remember what you did for me when I was in school, and yeah. So I stayed there in that school for a while, and then by the time I don't know how long after I moved there, that my dad, after he'd finished his accounting college training, he managed to join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And again, a little while after that, he actually got to be picked to join the High Commission in Australia. You know, in Kenya, we call it Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We call it Foreign Affairs. But in Australia, they call it the High Commission. So I'd moved from the village where I used to stay with my grandma. Then I moved to stay with my auntie. And then now again, my dad got a job opportunity to move out of Kenya and go to Australia. So they organized for our whole family to move. So at this point, it was my dad, it was me, it was my elder sister, and my younger sister. So again, I was moved from my auntie's place, and we got ready to go to Australia. Now, I remember, I'm not really sure when I was with my auntie, I'm not really sure at this point where my elder sister and younger sister were. I'm not really sure. Maybe they were with my mom or my auntie. I don't know where they were actually. I still haven't thought about that. I haven't figured that out. But I remember when I was at my auntie's place. Oh no. At my auntie's place, I think I was with my younger sister. But she wasn't yet in school. Yeah, she wasn't yet in school. But my elder sister, I don't know where she was at that time. But I remember when we were moving, we were all together as a family. So we moved. We moved from Kisumu to Nairobi by road. I think that was the longest time I'd ever been in a vehicle, and I think it was the first time that I got to really realize that the world is big, or Kenya for that matter is big. So we moved to Nairobi, and then from Nairobi we stayed at my uncle's place, and from there we got our plane. We took a plane. By that time there was no direct plane from Kenya to Australia. I don't know if there is now, but there wasn't. So we had to go via one of the southern African countries down there, most probably Zimbabwe, I think, at that time. So from there we went to Australia. Now, what I remember, something I remember about that trip is, mind you, I'd moved from the village. I'd only stayed in the village, and then I'd moved to Kondele. Kondele is not even town. Kondele is the outskirts of town. And I was very young. By this time I'd probably, I don't know if I was 4 or 5 years old, 6. I'm not sure. Around 4, maybe 5. I hadn't seen these really tall buildings. So in the car, I'm going to Nairobi, I'm looking, I'm seeing the world is so big. And then we get to Nairobi, and then I realize again that not everyone is a Luo. I realize that actually people talk in very funny languages. I'm like, what are these guys saying? Because I'd always been in this small cocoon where I thought, the village and Kondele was the whole world. All right. I was young. I had no idea how big actually the world is. So it was also my very, very first time. Okay, so we get to the plane, right? Now, I'm just seeing us in, I didn't even know what it was. I'm just seeing people seated, and I was like, oh, so we are in another bus, I didn't know that actually we were in the sky. At that age, I didn't know. So I'm just seeing a very big, long tube-looking car. We get in, and then when we got out, I remember it was like the shock of my life, because all of a sudden I'm seeing all these white people. I'm like, what? So I was staring, and my mom was like, don't stare, because when someone passes, I'd be like, I'd never seen a white person in my life. I'd never. So, I just had to ask. Sometimes you're so curious, especially as a child. I was curious to the extent, no, I had to ask. So I asked my mom, Mom, what's wrong with, what's wrong? Like, I couldn't understand how comes their color is different. I assumed there was something wrong with them. And my mom was like, no. There's nothing wrong with them. People are just different. I'm like, what do you mean different? They're white. Their color is... Yeah, she was like, yeah. There are some people are black, some people are white, some people are yellow. She tried to explain it like, even us we are black. Because I have an auntie who's light skin, and she was like, your auntie so-and-so, you see her skin is not like yours. Yeah, so there are people who are even lighter than her, and but as a kid I was wondering, like, all these albinos, all of them all together in one place, because I'd moved from, picture this, guys, I moved from a place where totally everyone was like me, to coming to a place where it was the immediate opposite, because we were the ones standing out now. Everybody was white, and we were the only black people there. And I couldn't really understand. You enter this tube, and in this tube also I'd noticed, yeah, there these white. But then when I alighted, when we came out in the airport, like, everyone was white. And I got to get used to it, yes, but I remember that really troubled my mind, because I was wondering, like, how are these people white? What's wrong with them? Are they what's wrong? I couldn't understand. Yeah, but then, yeah, so we got to Australia, and we began our life there for 4 more years, and I started school a little while after that. I just started school because already I was of school age by that time. If not 1 year, I started school. Yeah, I think I started school a year later. When we reached after 1 year, then I started school. But then anyway, that is a story that is for another episode. It's a story that I'm going to bring on my next story. Today I was just telling you guys about how I grew up and where I grew up, and telling you guys basically about how it started for me, starting in the village. That's where my life started, and in Kisumu, my early life. And then I'm going to tell you guys, we are just going to move on with the stories progressively. All right, there's a lot of stories, you guys, and you're going to enjoy these episodes. So please remember, guys, to subscribe if you haven't subscribed. If you just watch this video, watch the previous video, so that you can follow my stories in an orderly manner, so that you can understand. And there are a lot of crazy stories to come. Just want you guys to follow, like, and watch my videos to the end. All right, and see you guys on my next video. Thank you.